Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Master Coach Carrie Marshall, and it's time to go after those goals.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.
Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts Coaching. I'm so excited to be here with somebody that I have looked up to my entire life, honestly. So let me do an official introduction first before I give you my introduction. So I'm here with Dr. Eric Tobler. He is the National Clinical Director of Mortensen Dental Partners and Regional President of Stonehaven Dental. He also serves on the Mortensen Dental Partners Board of Directors. He's been a practicing dentist since 2007, and he's really focused on comprehensive dentistry with IV sedation. Now, another thing that Dr. Eric is really well known for is his volunteer service and humanitarian trips to Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Mexico. So now that's the official introduction, and now let me give you my introduction of him. That I want to introduce you to my big brother, Eric Tobler. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, Carrie.
I'm so excited to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about networking and making connections and how that can not only impact your professional life, but also your personal life as well. And I've watched you do this my entire life, but I'd love to have you now introduce yourself to everybody and kind of give you everyone a little bit of a backdrop about you and who you are.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate your podcast. You're such a great communicator, and that's a big part of my job now is communication. And I'm excited to be here. So as a dentist, I followed a similar path to most dentists out of dental school. My focus was, treating patients. Really fortunate. The dentistry is a family business. So you and I worked together in the dental practice. Your husband, Curtis, was our marketing director at one point. Brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, nephews and nieces, everybody. Yeah. So I was really fortunate to come into a situation where I had fantastic mentorship and, patient care has always been really important for me and kind of where I put my focus early on was just learning how to be a great dentist. But early on, I also had the opportunity as a very inexperienced dentist to be surrounded through a mastermind group with a group of people I didn't belong with, I felt. So through the credentials of my dad, I was invited to be part of a mastermind group where I was with dentists from all around the country who were great clinicians, but also very business minded. And so we met quarterly in Scottsdale, Arizona for a number of years. And that experience was just incredible for me. And it was really because of the things I learned were important, but the people I was able to associate with was really where the value came. And just understanding how they looked at the world, how they looked at their businesses, and the drive that they had was really awesome to me.
Well, and I love how you talk about the mastermind kind of being in a room that maybe you weren't supposed to be in, because I think that that's one of the keys to even networking is saying yes, even when you're maybe doubting or having that, I don't really belong. It's like, say yes when invitations come in and it doesn't matter where they come from, right? It doesn't matter that it had something to do with dad being a dentist and knowing these connections.
No, saying yes is everything. So for me, I love new experiences. That's actually where I get a lot of passion. And saying yes to new experiences is scary every time, but it's so impactful. And those new experiences as a dad, I get to almost relive the new experiences with my kids. That's another area that's really fun. But yeah, saying yes consistently has brought some really interesting things in my life. I got to be a race car driver for the Baja 1000 and other desert races. Like, I did not belong there. I've done so many heli skiing in Alaska. I like skiing, but I'm not. I just say yes. And
cage fighting, I believe, was one of them. I remember that one. Here's the funniest part about that story is you won. And I remember asking you afterwards, like, how did that feel? And you said, it's crazy. I won and I still got my ass kicked. And you were like, because you were pretty bruised and bloodied afterwards and you're still feeling it. So saying yes is important. We were talking before we started filming about taking your girls to Mexico for a humanitarian trip starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so even, like you mentioned, having your kids be part of that experience and having them say yes to things. So saying yes is important when we're networking. So tell us a little bit of other things that you've seen have been important as you've kind of built up a career around networking and connections.
Connection is really it. So going back to that group that I was a part of in the mastermind group. So I was with people who were drastically more successful than me in most metrics, right? As far as their clinical skills, their business skills, their life experience, I didn't belong there. So I had to ask myself, what can I bring? I brought a really unique perspective. A lot of them were hiring associates or dentists in their organization that they didn't understand because they were a different generation and their priorities were different. So I got to bring my own perspective, which I thought brought value. And then I could certainly control my own contribution and the energy I brought. So when I came, every time I made sure that I was the most positive person in the room and I was one that was going to be engaging. I was one that was going to ask interesting questions that maybe made people think about things a little bit different. So while my success, quote unquote, was not apparent or my reason and my qualifications to be there, I wanted to make sure that I was adding value into the group.
Well, and that's one of the questions I asked, I told all of my listeners and audience members on Instagram that you were going to be here. And that's one of the questions that came up was, when it seems like there's a group of successful people that are all hanging out together, how do I get invited to that? How do I get included into those type of invites? So, how would you answer that? How would you let people know to get these invites and get into these spaces that maybe we're not supposed to be in or not necessarily, there yet? Yeah.
I would say a few things to that. One, always say yes. So people, when they're looking to drive something or do something, if they're looking for people who are going to be engaged and bring their A game. So do that. Make sure that you're somebody who's going to be involved and bring value. I'm constantly asking myself, I was recently invited to something and it was like all expenses paid. That actually is an uncomfortable situation in some ways because I like a relationship that I bring value and I get value back. And so for me, I had to ask myself, okay, it doesn't really make sense to offer to pay for my portion of this event that I've been invited to. So what can I bring that's not monetary? And in that case, it was, making sure that I was introducing people to the host that would bring value. And so I'm constantly thinking, what can my contribution to be to make a meaningful impact?
And so that kind of brings me to the next point of how do you become a connector? Because as I've watched, gone to networking events with you, gone to different things, one of the things that I've always looked up to you about is being able to connect one person to another person and make it so natural, where a lot of people struggle with this. So how do you become that type of connector?
I would say I'm very curious and I try to just ask questions about, professionally, if that's the connection. But if there's not a professional connection, I just keep asking questions. Again, going back to loving new experiences, a big part of that for me is meeting people with different backgrounds and understanding what they bring and where their passion is. Because it doesn't matter if I'm there for a dental meeting or something else. Passion is across the board and it's in the most unusual places. And if you can find somebody's passion, the connection is crazy. You can have somebody who's just shy in the corner, not connecting, or somebody who seems like they're just don't want to be there. And if you can pinpoint their passion and start to dig in on that, the whole evening changes. It becomes a really, really fun time. And so for me, growing up in Utah has a lot of incredible strengths, right? Our mountains are beautiful. The people are so fun, but it's not very diverse for the most part. And so for me, when I travel for work and when I do things, I love talking to people who have just a completely different perspective on life. And as I dive into that and understand where their passion lies and what they're life has been like, understanding, their background, that for me is just fun. So that's just me having a good time. But then if I can remember those things and maybe find a connection between somebody that I've met and somebody that maybe I know in the past, if I can make those connections, those are, I think, a really fun way to bring people together. So that's what happens naturally for me. But I also have mentors and people I look up to that I find that they actually are able to connect people that they just met and introduce us like we know each other. So recently, a couple weeks ago, I was in an event and I was introduced to somebody by a mutual friend. I thought a mutual friend, but it turned out that he and I have known each other for years. He just met this other person like 20 minutes ago, but he introduced us with a very concise connection and it was just very natural. And I didn't realize until maybe an hour in that we were both just, new connections. So I thought that was interesting.
That's really cool. And I love to be able to see how, like you mentioned, if we can find passions for people, and that really goes back to our mindset about being engaged and interested in others. And I think that sometimes what happens is we get into these new situations and we actually shut ourselves down from being interested in people because we're so nervous about, are they going to like us? Are we alone? Are we all these things? And so always, I think that thought about being interested and, really kind of engaging in other people is going to be important for everybody to remember as we're talking about this.
Yeah. And I think it's actually a sign of somebody who's maybe inexperienced or just not comfortable in their own skin when they try to flex a little bit, like to prove why you belong to be here or why you deserve somebody's attention. It's for me, it's a lot more fun and a lot easier to get into those conversations if I'm interested. And, that's what I found. So
funny story, Eric and I were at a networking event a couple months ago together, and I asked him, I said, okay, look at this new group of people. I actually knew the hosts. They had invited me and then asked me to invite some people. So I invited Eric to come, knew he was going to be a great time to be up there. So Eric's in this new environment with nobody. And I said, wanting to just kind of see what Eric would say, I said, okay, so how do you figure out who to talk to? And he looked around and he said, well, I'm going to talk to everybody, number one, first. But he said, but I'm just looking for people that I'm interested in. Look, that guy's wearing a floral shirt just like me. Probably going to go and talk to him about it. And that's exactly what you did as you worked the room. And it was funny because as we were leaving, I was shocked to see how many connections, number one, you'd made. And then number two, how people were like, bye, Eric, bye, Eric. I was like, wow, every person, not maybe everybody in the room, but I would say the majority of the room you had talked to and made connections with. So when you come into a new environment, what do you think is the thought or thoughts that you have that help you kind of do that and work a room like that?
Yeah, that's evolved a little bit over time, I would say, for me. But what I do now is I really just focus on trying to bring a lot of energy. So, and confidence. Confidence is everything for me when I do anything like that's uncomfortable. I really try to, before I go, so the event that you're talking about, I had zero connection. It was in an industry I didn't know anything. I actually did, other than you, I had zero connection to it. Usually if I'm going to a professional event or something that I have some connection to, I'll start with research. So one of my colleagues who's a little bit less experienced with this, she's going to be part of a podcast. It's like a group discussion. And I shared with her that I usually do a little bit of social media stalking beforehand so I can understand where people are coming from. LinkedIn and is mostly what I do for professional stuff. But so I look into them and I really am asking two questions. One, what do we have in common that I may be able to build on, or what questions do I have about somebody who works for a specific organization or has something that's really interesting or cool that I want to learn about? I'll think about those things. And who would I love to add to my network? And those people I spend especially more time looking at and seeing what I can do there. But going back to your question, what do I do beforehand? So it's for me about building my confidence and making sure that before I go in there, I'm ready to go. So for me, what does that look like? I want to make sure I in that mastermind group, we learned some interesting tactics. One dentist grew up poor and he would always make sure that he had $100 bill in his pocket. for him, for some reason, that gave him confidence. Another friend would always get a haircut. Like they wanted to, just a crisp, tight haircut made them feel confident. And, for me, no hair, that doesn't really work out too much. But I did that for years and years. My barber, Kyle, amazing. And when I get that crisp line in my beard, it makes me feel good. Now for me, it's mostly, I just want to make sure that I'm dressed in a way that makes me feel confident. And I really spend time before I go consciously making sure that I'm in the right headspace. And then I take that same energy and I try to just be a builder. I want to make sure that the people I'm talking to feel elevated after our interaction. And, so I try to make people look good in front of their peers. Who doesn't need that? I mean, we all are hungry for that and just that validation. So I try to be that person who can elevate the experience of everybody just a little bit. And I think that leaves an impact.
Well, and I like that you talked first about how you're showing up for yourself. And I think that really does matter, looking at how we're going to feel our best. I have a tendency to want to either be in a swimming suit or sweats.
Yep.
Those are my two go-tos. But I do think that when we're in a position of, meeting new people, we really do want to think about how we're going to feel the most comfortable and confident in ourselves. And that does start with our appearance. And then, like you said, it starts with like the pre-party almost is what I like to call it when we're talking about event. Yep. And so really for all of our listeners, it's like, what are you listening to? Is it a podcast that gets you really excited? For me, it's music. I have actually a getting ready playlist that I love. And so, but then it's really looking through your stuff and asking yourself, like, am I ready? Am I preparing myself to go and represent me? And I always say you have to brand yourself.
Yes.
So what is the brand showing people? If I was to show up in the swimming suit or the sweats, it's a brand for sure. And if you want to convey that, that's great. But so remembering everybody to start with yourself and then really thinking about those questions that Eric just mentioned. I love the question of who do I want to bring into my network? I think that is crucial because that's another key element. And then also just being a good person. I think that being able to, like you said, look people in the eye. Can we all just put our phones away at networking events, by the way?
Oh, absolutely. Other than, hey, are you on Insta?
Yes.
Or,
yes,
making that connection instantly.
Yes.
And making sure that the folks that you want to add to your network, that you get their contact information then and you share it immediately. So yes. I love, right now I'm using digital business card called Dot. There's a lot of them out there. There's one actually, Dot's not the best one, but it's what I'm using currently. Somebody else I work with uses a QR code that just, you scan it and it instantly gives that person access to everything you want. So whether that's your social, your phone number,
website,
all that kind of stuff.
Anything that they've got.
So I think those digital business cards are so good because, a lot of us in events, the traditional way is to add, share a business card or even just text a number, and those are good. But those digital business cards I think are pretty amazing to help expand that content or the connection. And then, I don't do it often, but I've found that the people that I can remember and really stay connected to, it's usually more than one way, or it takes follow-up. So after an event, it's sending that text, hey, so nice to meet you. Here's the podcast that we were talking about. Or it's following them on Instagram and making sure that within the first week I send some comment or a comment on a post or something like that. And those really elevate that connection. I have a number of people that I actually know better because of the connection than the initial intro.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love to just do a follow-up on Instagram if that's how we connected, with a voice note, because that just goes to the next level.
A voice note.
Yeah. So you can actually just voice, you can just hit, there's a little microphone on Instagram on the messenger. Mm-hmm. And so I can just say, hey, Eric, it's so nice to meet you last night. That was so much fun. I can't wait to connect with you more. But that is fast, but also it is such an intriguing thing to get a voice thing, a little audio clip. I never get
those. That's interesting.
I'll send you one today, but it's really interesting to send an audio clip because people are fascinated by it, and it elevates it from just like a, hey, nice to meet you. So right. I love being able to do those. Now, one of the things that one of our, the listeners asked was, I work at home. how do I make connections and network when I'm at home working and then actually doing, family life at home? So how do people get out of their comfort zone, whether it's at home work, or just going to the office 9 to 5 every day? How do they start to create more connections outside of that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm mostly working from home now, but I also have the opportunity to travel for conferences and things like that, and visit some of the other practices I support across the country. So looking for those events that bring like-minded people together within the industry that you're either in or want to be in, I think it's worth investing in that. And it's a huge investment. It's time away from your family. Travel is not my favorite thing in the world, but it's worth it because of the value that it brings. And so invest in yourself. Find find the place where the type of people that you want to be interacting with are going to be, and prioritize that. There's a number of meetings that I go to, and I actually don't go to the meeting. I'm just there for the network that's going to be there, and that brings tremendous value. Last week I was at a conference in Vegas, and an entire day I was booked every hour on the hour, and I didn't go to the conference. It was mostly either side buildings that we had booked or just meeting at a cafe or something like that. That was the value that the conference brought, is the connections and just the ability to get together with people who are kind of driving in the same space I am.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you are like in cybersecurity, I think that's what this person was in. It's like, go and Google that, cybersecurity conferences, like go and, like Eric said, make a priority to then go and be in those spaces and really think about, what you're wanting to get. Is it, knowledge, experience, knowing just different brands and things like that. So,
yeah. And for me, as I started in this new path for, my, the position that I'm in now as National Clinical Director was very, very different than the network I had built as a dentist, right? As a dentist, I was visiting with other dentists, and now most of my, role is connecting with executive level folks, either at dental companies or dental vendors, support companies. And that was a very different world, almost like stepping into a new career, to be honest. And so what I started with was asking the few people I did know, because I didn't know many in that world, the few people I did know, I asked them, what are the conferences that are most meaningful? Where are you getting, who's driving value for you right now? And those are the questions that really help me versus just Googling it, because Google, it's tough. You never know if the meeting is really what they say it's going to be. Where is it going to bring value? But, I started with my very, very small group of connections and asked those people what was meaningful for them. And that's where I started.
That's a great, great idea there. So let's talk about now, how do you then go from connections to working together? Because I know that that's a big leap for a lot of people that feels uncomfortable, and it gets weird to make offers to people. So let's say that we have a connection, you and I have met, and maybe I want to make an offer to coach you now, or for you to look at my services. How do you do that without, coming off as that creepy salesperson? And what does that look like for you when you're kind of making connections and business deals from we know each other to now maybe we should work together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm mostly on the opposite side. So mostly I have vendors.
Mostly people are coming to you, right?
Because of the organization I represent.
Let's pause for just a minute, because I think it's really important for people to know what you do, because I think that, once again, when we say dental, a lot of people are thinking that you're a dentist, but let's kind of talk about that dynamic first of, like, you're the National Clinical Director. And so what exactly are you doing for your company right now?
Yeah, so we have 150 practices across 9 states, and I'm really just helping to connect the technology and clinical resources for our dentists to try to help make their patient care better. That's my ultimate goal. So I'm trying to find the best products and services and technology across the industry that's going to add value and make our lives easier for our practice managers and the dentists that we serve.
So I'm really excited that you're actually on the other end of this, of you're the one that's actually getting the offers from companies and products and services, because I know a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this are the ones that are making the offers. So let's kind of switch that narrative and say, what when people come to you and make offers, how do those go the best? What makes the most difference for you on how you want to work with people when they make offers to, have you buy their products and services?
Yeah. I would say the number one thing that gets credibility from anybody is a referral from somebody I trust. And that goes both ways. So I'm always, speaking of trying to add value to my network, I'm working with some really great companies right now. And when it works out and when they deliver on exactly what we've agreed on and we're working together in sync, it makes it really easy for me to tell friends in other organizations with similar needs, hey, this is somebody you should really look at. And that only comes by understanding your customer and what they need. And but for me, when I can make a good referral to a friend in a similar organization, that adds tremendous value, because that helps me really build my credibility across that organization, like across the network for the people I'm referring, for the vendors that I'm helping out. It really adds a lot of credibility.
So one thing is to over deliver. It sounds like, make sure that not only do you love your product and service, but that you're over delivering for your customers. And then once again, I think the other thing is letting people that like that you personally know, let them know what you do.
Yeah.
Because I think that's another thing that happens so often is, I know I was talking to a neighbor of mine, and, we've lived there for several years, and I was like, I don't even know what you do. And when he told me, I was like, oh, I know 5 people that actually need that. And he's like, oh yeah. So letting people know what you do, and then over delivering. And then also, I think being somebody that is referring, make sure that you're almost having your little black notebook of your Rolodex of like, who do I love and who would I want to talk and really be a raving fan for.
Yeah, and I would say the people who bring the most value for me a lot of times, as we're introducing or being introduced, we talk about what we do, and there's always that, yeah, we should find something, I'd love to talk more about that. And some of the folks I appreciate most will say something like, it doesn't really feel like we're a fit, but I know what could really help you out based on our discussion.
Yes.
And so that's huge that, if we seek first just to help the people around us, and if that happens to work within our square box that we have that we're able to deliver, awesome. But if they're looking for a round peg and it's not us, that's okay to say, I don't think this is a fit right now. That's something that either maybe we as that's something that I'm looking to deliver in the future. I'll let you know when we get there. Or that's really not my world, but here's a connection that I could share that may help. That'll go a long way.
Yeah, I had a lunch like that a couple months ago where we met, we really like each other, and it just didn't really work out. But it's fascinating to watch how we've both actually really helped each other's businesses in the last 3 months. But it just didn't work out for us personally to work together, but it's been phenomenal to be able to do that. So where do you see that people trip up the most with networking and connections?
Well, I can share where I trip up the most.
Yeah, let's do it.
I can talk about that. I would say for me, it's on the back end. So front end, when I'm introduced to somebody, when I make a connection, again, because it's my passion, it's easy for me to be curious. It's just who I am, and I love learning about new things and new people, and that part I love. It's the back end follow-up that really drives meaning, and there's nothing more embarrassing and frustrating for me than saying, hey, I'm Eric, and they're like, yeah, we met. That is so painful, because all of a sudden, any credibility or connection that I built a year ago, a month ago, whenever it was, is dramatically diminished, right? And so I really have so much respect for people who do the work on the back end to drive that connection home, to make the follow-up, to send the follow-up message and make sure and continue that. And I think the most successful people I've seen and the people I aspire to be like are the ones that are able to make the connection and file it away and then pull it back when they need to. And I think, again, for me, that's where I'm focusing, is how can I make the connection and keep it meaningful even down the road.
And so when you're talking about that back end, how do you work on that? What does a back end system look like for you that can really help you bring people's names and faces to recollection when you need it.
Yeah. I would say the few things that I'm working on right now. So one is just setting aside time. For me, organization isn't one of my strengths. We all have lots of strengths and weaknesses, right? Connection is a strength for me, organization, not so much. And so that's where, for me, the effort comes in, is being intentional about, I'm going to block off this time for this meeting or networking event. And when I'm doing it right and I'm intentional, I'm also blocking out 3 hours the following week to make those connections, to follow up and thank people for what they've done, to review the literature that I may have, again, if there's a podcast or something that somebody shared with me, I need to make sure and give myself time that I've already blocked out to do the follow-up, to do the research, to do those kinds of things. I think that makes a big difference.
Well, and that's how we create stronger connections, is if somebody shares something with us, a podcast episode, so different being like, thank you, versus, once again, having an actual conversation through text, email, voice, or whatever of, I listened, here's what I gained from it, and then starting that next conversation with people. So let's talk now a little bit, kind of shift a little bit, because networking isn't something that just stops professionally for you. You've created a lot of really great experiences and things happening personally for you with connecting with people. So I know that it's already a passion for you, but how has networking created awesome friendships and relationships for you as you've gotten older and, have kids in different sports and that different things? So how do you even connect with people when because that's the other question I got, is like, I'm okay with work, but personally, me and my wife are struggling to find a new group of friends as we've kind of transitioned life and everything like that. So how do you do that?
Yeah. It's kind of one and the same for me, honestly. I don't call it networking when it's with friends, but it's the same thing. And it really goes back to the prep on the front end, making sure that when I'm going out, I'm doing it intentionally and I'm showing up with my best self possible. That's really all of it. And again, being curious and just bringing the energy and the questions that get to meaningful conversation. I'm still guilty of this, which is, starting off with, what do you do for work? Where do you live? Those are good questions.
They're easy entry points. They're natural, easy entry points.
But the sooner I can move to, what are you passionate about? What do you do what do you do on a day off? Well, the sooner I can get to those questions and really understand what makes an individual, what drives them, that's where it gets fun pretty quickly. And so I would say, whether it's personal or professional, finding that out is really meaningful. And also recognizing that every connection doesn't have to be a meaningful one. Sometimes people are incredibly interesting, and the discussion brings so much interest and value to me. But I also, through the course of the conversation, realize, yeah, that's really not going to be somebody I want to connect with or continue a meaningful connection with. That's okay too.
It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Great, additional perspective, but probably not one that brings value for me.
Yeah. So I know that this year you've started to do a lot more professional speaking. So kind of those bigger events, speaking at dental conferences, other conventions, events like that. Now, I know one of the questions that I got was, I really want to make connections with people that I watch speak, or this person went to an event and she said, I desperately wanted to talk to the person putting it on, but I got so nervous. So as a public speaker, a professional speaker, how do you like to engage with people after events? And I know it's different for everybody, but how do you like to engage with people after events and something that you've spoken at?
Yeah, I would say it's really just about coming with meaningful questions. If somebody's presenting on a specific topic, it's because they're passionate about it. You already know where their passion lies, and likely if they're a good speaker, they have really just laid out something that drives them, right? And so if what drives them is something that drives you or is something that you're tremendously curious about, that's exactly what it is looking for those opportunities to drive after. So of course it depends on the event. If it's really big, it may be hard to have a meaningful conversation, but somebody I connected with really early on in my career in a clinical training told me something that I thought was awesome, and I've really tried to carry this forward, and it's been awesome. And he told me that most of the time, clinical courses that he'll go to, he'll try to buy the speaker a steak dinner afterwards. If it's a presentation that the content was really awesome, he's going to try to buy him a steak dinner afterwards. Who doesn't want a steak dinner? And the term steak dinner, I think, is really meaningful, because if you'd say, hey, let's go get something to eat, like maybe it's Chipotle or McDonald's.
Right.
A steak dinner, like for the most people, especially if they're speaking, if you're at a conference, the alternative is going to be to sit at the hotel bar, possibly by yourself. So if you meet somebody who has really interesting questions and is very interested in what you have to say, and you go to dinner, then that sounds like a pretty appealing process or prospect. So flipping that from then the learner's perspective, or the person who's asking the question, oftentimes we're paying a lot of money to be there at the event. Again, time away from family, travel. A steak dinner is nothing. That adds maybe a 5% to our total budget, but it can add 1,000% to the value. And that friend who told me that he does this all the time, his additional comment was, as a professional speaker, you have to speak to the dumbest person in the room. You have to bring down your content to the level that, from a clinical perspective, you've got to make sure that they're just absolutely meeting the margin of safety, and maybe nuances or a lot of the things that you really believe, but it's hard to talk about without going into a lot of detail. You skip over that as a speaker because you're trying to reach a very broad audience. Contrast that to a steak dinner. We're sitting down and you start to go into a concept, and I say, hold on for a second. That's really interesting. Why do you do it that way? Because I've always done it this way. And then as that conversation starts to roll, we really are digging deeper and deeper and deeper and getting into the philosophy behind the presentation more than the concept. Like the general concepts of the presentation are good, but the philosophy and the thinking behind it is usually where the value really comes from.
Well, and so cool to be able to just make that offer and be like, the worst thing that can happen is a no. It was a no before I asked,
right?
Which is always what Curtis says, right? But then, like you said, to then get that value, it's like 10x what you invested to come for, to be able to sit down with somebody and actually talk with them. So I love that. So you get to go and travel all around the country, with different practices, different dental practices. Let's talk to like a dental assistant. What can a dental assistant, because some people say networking's not for me because I have a 9-to-5 job. Why is networking important for everybody, not just entrepreneurs?
Well, I think it really just opens up your mind to what's possible. So I have a friend and mentor that I met through a networking event, and we've been able to grow our careers together. Like side by side, I saw something that they did and it really, really worked. And so I did that. And from the perspective of people who were close to me, it was my genius idea. It's not my genius. I just copied it from somebody else who I saw it worked for them. And, the great part about networking, I think, is that if you cast a really wide net, you're going to catch fish in all sorts of places, right? If you focus in on and say, this is really exactly what I want, that may work for some people, but for me, that's not it. I cast a really wide net, and I may learn something in an entirely different industry that I'm able to apply in what I'm doing today, and it totally unexpected, but it brings a lot of value. But for me, like I said, having mentors and friends that are in it together, kind of all driving for the same or similar things, that's been really awesome.
That's cool. How do you go about now teaching? Because you have 3 kids, you have 2 girls and a boy. How do you then teach your kids the value of networking and how to do it effectively? I know you have teenagers and then, little guys coming up to be a tween. That's crazy.
Yeah.
We have the same ages of kids, so It's been really fun. But so how do you teach your kids how to network?
Boy, I think the biggest thing we can teach our kids is just self-confidence. That it's hard to do. And, you know, the number one way is to just show it yourself and have them model it. Even when you're just out doing errands, right? Just project yourself in a way that opens you up to the world. Because it's easy, so easy to put our head down and do what we're doing and not connect with anybody. Just this last week, my daughter and wife and I went for a little bike ride, went to a local cafe, and the person who was working the counter, as we were walking away, my daughter said, "Oh, I think I go to school with him." And I said, "Well, why didn't you say anything?" "Well, it's embarrassing, and I don't really know him." And so we just talked about how he must have felt. Oh, he probably knew you too, but you guys didn't acknowledge each other. And, you know, now 25 minutes have gone by. It's even more awkward to do it then. Which
Right.
So we had this whole discussion about what would have happened when you saw him and instantly said, "Oh, I think we had a class together last year." Would that have changed the perspective for both of you? And so it's, I think, just being intentional, talking about, you know, what the value that the networking and connecting with people bring, and then just modeling it yourself, I think, are probably the things that I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah, I know that for us, one of the big things that we try and teach is that it's always a good idea to acknowledge people. You know, that everyone wants to be acknowledged, because even if that kid wasn't, if he was like, "No, I go to, you know, I'm homeschooled,"
Right.
It was like, "Oh, well, you know," and then you still have something to talk about. And so that's always what we're trying to teach our kids, is that acknowledgement is never a bad thing. Looking people in the eyes is never a bad thing. You know, smiling and saying hello. And, you know, I was out with our mom the other day, and it was interesting. She to the cashier, she said something like, "Oh, I really love your earrings." And the girl had her head down the whole time, and she looked up at mom and just said, "Thank you." And then they started to have a conversation, and my daughter was with us, and I just told her, I said, "Look, grandma just did it. Like, acknowledgement means everything." And our mom said, "I've never found a time that I've ever felt bad about looking people in the eye and giving them a compliment ever." And so I think that that's the other thing to kind of remember, is that as we're networking, there's always things to find. There's always interesting things. There's things to notice about people, and that acknowledgement is never a waste.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit. One person messaged and said, "More than anything, I want to know about how you two were raised, because I follow both of you, and I follow your sister and your brother as well. So it's somebody that knows our family." And she said, "You're all highly successful." Thank you for that, by the way. But she said, "What has made it for you? What do you think it was, how you were raised, that has helped all four of you be so motivated and driven?"
I wish I could figure that out, because as a parent right now, I'll just share. I mean, so right now I'm about the age that our parents were when I was married. What? I know, hard to wrap my head around. But I remember thinking at that time that my parents had they had life figured out, one, and they were pretty much, in my mind, stagnant. Like, they had checked the box and they were just living their life for the rest of eternity until they died. I really had that mindset when I was, 20, 21 years old, that I was in a growth state, they were in a stable state, and that's just
how it was.
They had it figured out.
Right.
And that might be true, but certainly it's not true for me, being 43 years old. I feel, so much in a state of evolution, and especially as a parent, I feel vastly underqualified, and realizing that every kid needs something different, every situation needs something different. And so for me, it's been about having an honest conversation consistently with my kids about everything. And I really appreciate that about my parents. Specifically, our mom was very open about personal finances, which many of my friends were, that part of their parents' life was personal or private. They didn't want maybe, you don't want your kids to brag about it to the neighbors or complain. But I don't, there's different reasons for everybody, but I really appreciated our parents being open to talk about really anything. And those conversations would come without judgment, so just really, no matter what the question is, interesting, Marley, tell me more about that. No matter what my internal dialogue is at that same time, because, obviously as a parent, we want to protect our kids. We have all the decisions that we want them to make maybe mapped out, and whether they do that or not, it's important for us to hear what they're doing and why, and share with them in a very open way, I guess, is what I'm trying to do for my own kids right now.
Well, and I think when I saw that question, the thing that came up for me was exactly what you said, that you're trying to teach your kids, which is self-confidence. I think that's one thing that mom and dad did really well, was not necessarily sit down and talk about it, but always, support us in decisions that we were making, not without having their own thoughts and opinions about it, but, and then the other thing that I thought of was hard work was just an example day in and day out in our family. Dad took emergencies 24/7, sometimes at his detriment or the family detriment is, but I know that hard work was always something that we were not just told about, but it was a daily grind at our home. Dad was building a dental practice. And so I think that was kind of what came up for me, was like hard work. And I think the thought, and even with, watching Dad do anything, the thought that I know he has is like, I can outwork anybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah. and if I know that work creates success.
Yeah. That's a challenge though too, because the flip side is, if you're working all the time, if we're putting work in the box of professional work, and we work in everything we do, right? But professional work is so valuable. It's, been incredible for me to put my head down and go to work. It's brought a lot of success, but also we have to find that balance in our lives as well, because it doesn't matter how professionally successful you are, if you're, burning bridges with your family or friends or elsewhere. And so there is a very delicate balance there that we're all trying to strike. And that's a conversation that constantly at our house we're having. My daughter's reading a book right now, and she was telling me, that she really wants to find a career that she doesn't have to trade her time for her money. She's looking for, passive income and ways to build that. And I thought to myself, yeah, I want that too. I love it. I love that she's thinking about that as somebody who's still in high school, and with whatever that means for her, it's hopefully, and I would say, finding a combination of both is the right way to go for most people. But I love that she's thinking about that already, and balancing hard work though with also taking care of the people around you personally, I think is a really important thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one thing that I've always talked about with coaching is, as I've helped entrepreneurs, business people that can really be sucked into work 24/7. It's, making sure that you have hobbies, making sure that you're getting outside, making sure that you're creating lasting relationships that are meaningful to you. And so making sure to do all of that is really important. So as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say is maybe a business tip or something that you'd want people to know about as they are growing businesses themselves?
Let's stick on the topic of balancing work with the rest of your life. I would say acknowledge that there are seasons that you have to put your head down and work your ass off. And that's okay. Make sure that you know when you're doing it and why, and, set a deadline for yourself that I'm going to put my head down and really charge at this hard for 2 weeks or a month or whatever the time frame is. Those seasons are okay, but make sure that you're doing it intentionally and that you're doing it with some passion behind it. The thing that I think is really easy to do is to start to spend too much time with work and start to despise it. Start to feel yourself being drained and pulled down. And if you're working like that, you're really doing yourself a huge disservice. For most of us, and I would say especially the folks who are listening to your podcast, they're doing it because they need to invest in themselves. And if our job involves connecting with people or anything that really requires a lot of creativity, you need to come at it fresh. 40 hours, 60 hours, 80 hours a week, the hours don't matter. They just don't. What matters is the output. It matters what you created during that time. And so if you can make sure that during the times that you're putting your head down and working, you're doing it intentionally, you're doing it with passion, and you're effective, fantastic. And if you're not, you need to step back and really look at not working harder, but finding ways to work more effectively.
Awesome. Well, this has been so much fun for me. I love having you on here. I love to share your wisdom with other people. I'm lucky enough that, I have you in my phone book. But where can other people start to connect with you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
So Instagram, I follow you and
Eric A. Tobler, I believe is your...
I think it's Eric_A_Tobler.
We like our underscores, everybody.
It's so obnoxious.
It is obnoxious. I always say drive your thoughts with a lot of underscores.
Yeah.
People will figure it out. So Eric A. Tobler on Instagram.
Yep.
LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn as well?
I'm in LinkedIn. Yeah. Eric Tobler.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a fantastic way to do it.
Awesome. Okay. Last question. You ready?
I'm ready. I think I am. Right.
Okay. Aliens, real or not?
I have no idea. That's Carrie and I were texting beforehand because we're doing a podcast. We said, maybe we should do a Joe Rogan, talk about flat earth, aliens, a few other things like that. So let's save that for the 4-hour format.
Done.
Right?
Done and done. Yeah, we're just getting warmed up for that one. So that'll be next time. Well, thanks for being here. And everybody, make sure to connect with Eric on Instagram and LinkedIn. If you have any questions for either one of us after you listen to the podcast, of course, come over to Drive Your Thoughts Coaching, and we're going to continue the conversation over there on Instagram. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If you're ready to get in the driver's seat of your own life, you can come and follow me at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching on Instagram, or come and see more ways to work with me at driveyourthoughts.com.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.